The Mafia boss caught his maid teaching his blind daughter to fight in the basement. He was furious, ready to fire her on the spot. But when armed men stormed his home targeting his daughter, he realized the quiet maid wasn't just any teacher. She was the legendary underground fighter who'd vanished 10 years ago, and she'd been preparing his daughter for the war he never saw coming. The sound hit Marco Bellini before he even opened the door. Crack, crack,
Crack. Sharp.
rhythmic.
Wrong.
He froze at the top of the basement stairs, his hand still on the brass handle. He'd come home early from the port negotiations, unusual for a Tuesday, because something in his gut told him to. Marco had learned long ago to trust his instincts. They'd kept him alive in a business where most men didn't see 40. He was 43 now. The sounds continued. Wood on wood. Fast, controlled strikes that echoed up through the mansion's stone foundation like a heartbeat he didn't recognize. Marco descended slowly, his leather shoes silent on the marble steps. The basement was supposed to be empty. It was always empty. He kept it that way deliberately, a space for storage, old furniture, forgotten things. Safe things. The door at the bottom stood ajar. Through the gap, he saw movement. His 12-year-old daughter Aurora stood in the center of the room, feet planted wide, holding a wooden baton in both hands. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Sweat dampened her collar. Her eyes, clouded and unfocused, blind since birth, stared at nothing. And she was moving. Isolde, the quiet maid he'd hired 8 months ago, circled her like a wolf. She held a matching baton, tapping it against her palm in irregular patterns. Aurora's head tilted with each tap, tracking the sound. Again, Isolde said. Her voice was cold, professional. She struck. The baton whipped through the air toward Aurora's left shoulder, and Aurora moved. Not away.
Toward it.
Her own baton came up in a sharp diagonal block that cracked against Isolde's with perfect timing. Marco's breath caught. Good, Isolde said. But you hesitated. Hesitation is death. Listen to the air, Aurora. A strike announces itself before it touches you. The wind parts. The space compresses. Feel it. I'm trying. Don't try.
Do.
Isolde attacked again, faster this time. 3 strikes in rapid succession. High, low, high. Aurora blocked the first 2, but the third caught her on the hip. She gasped but didn't cry out. What did you miss? Isolde demanded. The rhythm changed, Aurora said, breathing hard. You paused half a second before the third strike. I thought you were finished. Exactly. Your enemy will lie with their timing. Trust only what you hear, not what you expect. Marco's hand tightened on the doorframe. His pulse hammered in his ears. This was insane. This was dangerous. Aurora was blind, fragile, his only child. She needed protection, not this violence. He shoved the door open. Both figures turned toward him. Isolde's expression didn't change, but her grip shifted on the baton, a subtle adjustment that Marco's trained eye caught immediately. Defensive. Ready. Aurora's face lit up.
Papa.
You're home early. What the hell is this? Marco's voice came out low, controlled. The tone he used before he hurt someone. Language, Papa, Aurora said, but her smile faded when she heard the edge in his words. Isolde stepped forward, placing herself between Marco and Aurora. The movement was slight but deliberate. That made Marco even angrier. I asked you a question, he said, his eyes locked on Isolde. What are you doing with my daughter? Teaching her, Isolde said simply. Teaching her to what? Get hurt. Get killed. Marco pointed at Aurora. She's blind, for God's sake. She can barely walk down the stairs without help. That's not true. Aurora's voice cracked with sudden emotion. I can do more than you think, Papa. I just... Go to your room, Aurora.
No.
Listen to me.
Now.
The command in Marco's voice cut through the basement like a blade. Aurora's jaw clenched, her clouded eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. She dropped the baton. It clattered on the concrete floor, the sound obscenely loud in the sudden silence. You treat me like I'm made of glass, she whispered. But glass can cut too. She walked toward the stairs, one hand trailing along the wall. Her steps were sure, practiced. She didn't stumble once. Marco waited until her footsteps faded above them. Then he turned back to Isolde. "You're fired." Isolde didn't flinch. "No, I'm not." The sheer audacity of it stunned him for a heartbeat. "Excuse me? You won't fire me," Isolde said calmly, "because you know I'm right. You've surrounded Aurora with guards and walls and cotton padding, but you haven't made her safe. You've made her helpless. And in your world, Mr. Bellini, helpless people die." Marco crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. He was taller, broader, a man who'd built an empire on intimidation and violence. Isolde didn't back up. "You don't know anything about my world," he said softly. "Don't I?" Something flickered in Isolde's gray eyes. Something cold and ancient. "Your enemies know you have a blind heir. They know she's isolated, vulnerable. How long do you think it'll be before one of them decides she's the easiest way to hurt you? I have security. Security can be bought.
Killed.
Circumvented." Isolde's voice remained level. "But a daughter who can defend herself? That's something no one can take from her." Marco wanted to argue, wanted to scream, wanted to throw this woman out of his house and forget this conversation ever happened. But he couldn't, because she was right. "Get out," he said finally. "I'll deal with you in the morning." Isolde held his gaze for another long moment, then nodded once. She set her baton down carefully on a shelf, then walked past him toward the stairs. She paused at the door. "Your daughter is stronger than you know," she said quietly. "The question is whether you're brave enough to let her prove it." Then she was gone. Marco stood alone in the basement, surrounded by the echoes of violence, and realized his hands were shaking. Not from rage.
From fear.
Marco poured himself a 3rd glass of scotch, and still his hands wouldn't steady. The study was dark except for the lamp on his desk, casting long shadows across the leather-bound books and framed photographs. In one frame, Aurora smiled at the camera, taken before she understood her eyes didn't work like everyone else's. Before she learned what different meant. Before Marco learned that all his power couldn't fix her. The door opened without a knock. Only one man in the world had that privilege. "You look like hell," Vittor said, closing the door behind him. Marco's consigliere was 10 years older, gray-haired and lean, with the calculating eyes of a man who'd survived 3 regime changes in the Bellini family. He'd been Marco's father's right hand before becoming Marco's. "I fire the maid," Marco said. Vittor raised an eyebrow. "The quiet one?" Isolde. She was teaching Aurora to fight. In the basement. With weapons. Wooden training batons. Vittor corrected. "I know." Marco's head snapped up. "You knew?" For about 3 weeks, Vittor moved to the sideboard and poured his own drink. "I had someone check it out after the night staff reported unusual sounds. Seemed harmless enough." "Harmless?" Marco's voice rose. "Aurora is blind, Vittor. She could get hurt. She could. She could learn to protect herself," Vittor interrupted quietly. "Something worth considering." "Not you too." Marco drained his glass and immediately regretted it. The alcohol wasn't helping. Nothing was helping. Vittor sat in the chair across from Marco's desk, taking his time. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "Do you remember what happened to Carmine Russo's son?" Marco's jaw tightened. Everyone in their world remembered. Carmine Russo had been a mid-level boss in the Eastern District. His son had cerebral palsy, needed a wheelchair. Last year, a rival family kidnapped the boy during a power play. They sent him back in pieces. "Aurora is not. Aurora is your heir," Vittor said. "Your only child. Your obvious weakness." He leaned forward. "Every enemy you've ever made knows exactly where to hurt you most. And they know she can't see them coming. That's why she has guards. I've assigned." "How many?"
8.
10. Vittor's voice hardened. "Marco, wake up. You can't guard her every second of her life.
She's 12 now.
Soon she'll be 15, 18, 20. You going to keep her locked in this mansion forever?" surrounded by armed men who are paid to care whether she lives or dies. They're loyal. They're paid, Vitor set his glass down with a sharp click. Loyalty bought with money dies the moment someone offers more. You know this. We've both bought enough loyalty to understand exactly what it's worth. Marco wanted to argue.
Couldn't.
Double the security detail, he said instead. Triple it. I want eyes on Aurora 24 hours.
No.
The word hung in the air between them like a challenge. What did you say? Marco's voice dropped to the dangerous quiet that preceded violence. Vitor didn't flinch. I said no. You're not thinking clearly. You're thinking like a father, not a boss. I am a father. Then act like one who wants his daughter to survive in this world. Vitor stood, his shadow falling across the desk. You know what I see when I look at Aurora? I see a girl who's already learned to navigate a world she can't see, who's memorized every room in this mansion, every step, every corner, who never complains, never cries, never asks for pity. That takes strength, Marco. Real strength. She's a child. She's a Bellini, Vitor snapped. And in 6 years, God forbid something happens to you, she'll be the head of this family. What then? You think the other families will respect a boss who can't even defend herself? You think our own soldiers won't see weakness and opportunity? The words hit harder than any fist could have. Marco had never said it aloud, but he'd thought about it. Late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, what would happen to Aurora if he died? Would Vitor protect her? Would the family fracture? Would someone decide a blind girl wasn't worth following? I don't want this life for her, Marco whispered. I know, Vitor's voice softened. But it's the life she has. The only question is whether you prepare her for it or leave her defenseless. Before Marco could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside.
Fast, determined. Too light to be guards.
The study door flew open. Aurora stood in the doorway, her clouded eyes fixed somewhere past Marco's shoulder, her chin lifted in defiance. She must have been listening from the hall. Of course she had. The girl heard everything. I don't want dogs, she said clearly. I want teeth. Marco stared at his daughter, at the set of her jaw, the straightness of her spine, the way her hands, steady and sure, gripped the doorframe for balance, but not for support. When had she grown so tall? When had she stopped being the little girl who needed him to cut her food? Aurora, he began. I heard everything, Papa, her voice didn't waver.
Uncle Vitor is right.
You can't protect me forever. But Isolde can teach me to protect myself. You don't understand what you're asking. I understand perfectly. Aurora stepped into the room, navigating the furniture from memory. She stopped 3 feet from his desk, exactly where a visitor would stand. I'm asking you to stop seeing me as broken. I'm asking you to give me a chance to be strong. I'm asking you to trust me. Marco looked at Vitor, who offered no help, only a slight nod. He looked back at his daughter and realized he was terrified. Not of his enemies, not of his rivals or the violence that constantly circled his empire like sharks.
Of this.
Of letting go. Of watching Aurora walk into danger and not being able to stop it. I'll think about it, he said finally. Aurora's expression didn't change. She'd already won, and they both knew it. Marco didn't sleep that night. At dawn, he made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of confronting Isolde again, he needed answers. Real ones. The address Vitor had given him led to a neighborhood Marco rarely visited, too poor to be worth controlling, too stubborn to be easily intimidated. The buildings here sagged with age, their brick facades stained with decades of coal smoke and neglect. The boxing gym occupied the basement of an old textile factory. No sign outside, just a red door with peeling paint and the distant sound of fists hitting leather. Marco descended the concrete steps alone. He'd left his bodyguards in the car. Some conversations required privacy. The gym smelled of sweat, liniment, and blood. A dozen fighters worked the bags and sparred in makeshift rings. Most were young, hungry, desperate. The kind of men who fought because the alternative was starving. An old man sat behind a battered desk in the corner, one eye milky with cataracts, the other sharp as broken glass. He looked up when Marco entered, and something crossed his weathered face. Recognition. Then fear. "We're paid up," the old man said quickly. "Protection money went to your collectors last week. I got receipts." "I'm not here about money." Marco pulled up a chair without being invited. "I'm here about a woman."
Goes by is sold now.
Dark hair, gray eyes, late 20s. Works as a maid in my house. The old man's jaw tightened. "Don't know her." "You're lying." Marco leaned forward. "And before you lie again, understand something. I don't want to hurt her. I want to know who she is. What she is. Because she's teaching my daughter to fight, and I need to know if I can trust her." The old man studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed, the sound like air escaping from something long sealed. "You really don't recognize her, do you?"
Should I?
"Maybe not." She looked different back then. Harder. Hungrier. The old man stood slowly, joints popping, and walked to a wall covered in faded photographs. His fingers traced the frames until they stopped on one near the bottom. Marco rose and looked. The photograph showed a young woman in the center of a makeshift fighting ring, surrounded by a crowd of screaming faces. She wore torn shorts and a sports bra, her body lean and scarred, her dark hair cut brutally short. Her face was split in a feral grin, blood streaming from her nose, one hand raised in victory.
Marco stared.
The bone structure was the same. The eyes, cold gray, ancient beyond their years. But everything else was different. This woman looked like she'd been forged in a furnace and quenched in violence. "The White Wolf," the old man said quietly. That's what they called her. Undefeated in 47 fights. Made more money in 2 years than most of us see in a lifetime. Marco's mouth went dry. That's a sold. That was a sold. Before she disappeared, the old man returned to his desk, moving like each step hurt. "You want the whole story, or just the parts that matter?" "Everything." The old man poured himself something from a flask and didn't offer Marco any. "She started fighting when she was 16. Her and her brother, kid named Luca, 2 years younger. Their parents died, left them nothing. Isolde fought to keep them fed, keep Luca in school. She was good, natural talent, but more than that, she had something inside her. Something cold and precise. She didn't fight angry. She fought like it was mathematics." Marco listened, trying to reconcile the woman in the photograph with the quiet maid who'd stood in his basement, teaching Aurora to hear the air. "She climbed the ranks fast," the old man continued. "Too fast. Started attracting attention from the big money. The organizers, the syndicates. They wanted her in the underground championship circuit. The real fights. The ones where people die. And she agreed. She refused. Said she fought for money, not glory. But then Luca got sick. Needed surgery they couldn't afford. Experimental treatment from a specialist in Switzerland." The old man's voice turned bitter. "So, she made a deal with the devils. 1 tournament, 5 fights. Win, and they'd pay for everything." Marco already knew where this was going. The sick feeling in his stomach told him. "The tournament was 10 years ago," the old man said. "Run by a syndicate in the Port District. Big money, big names. The kind of event where men like you make fortunes betting on who lives and dies." "Men like me," Marco repeated softly. "The Bellini family funded that tournament." The old man met his gaze. "Your father's operation. Maybe you remember. Maybe you don't. You would have been, what, 33? Just starting to take over the business?"
Marco remembered.
God help him, he remembered. His father had called it expansion into entertainment, blood sport for the wealthy and bored. Marco had gone to 1 fight, seen the brutality, and told his father he wanted nothing to do with it. But he'd taken the money it generated. He'd used it to build his empire. Isolde made it to the finals, the old man continued. 4 fights for wins. Barely got touched. Then her brother showed up.
Luca.
Stupid kid snuck in to watch his sister fight. But the organizers had other plans. They knew about him. Knew Isolde would do anything to protect him. Marco's hands clenched. What did they do? They put him in the ring. The old man's voice cracked. Matched him against a fighter twice his size. Said if Isolde threw her fight, they'd go easy on the boy. Let him live. Did she throw it? What do you think? The old man's eye gleamed with moisture.
She tried.
But the other fighter in her match didn't know about the deal. Came at her full force. Isolde had to defend herself. She won in 90 seconds. And while she was winning, he didn't need to finish. They killed him, Marco whispered. Beat him to death in front of 300 people. Including his sister, the old man drained his flask. Isolde fought her way out of that building. Put 5 men in the hospital. Then she disappeared. The White Wolf died that night. Became a ghost. Marco stood frozen, the photograph burning itself into his mind. Now she's in your house, the old man said. Teaching your blind daughter to fight. You want to know if you can trust her? He laughed, cold and sharp. That depends. Did your father profit from her brother's death? Marco didn't answer. He already knew. Marco returned to the mansion as the sun climbed over the estate walls. He went straight to his study and locked the door. For 2 hours, he sat in silence, staring at nothing, the old man's words circling in his head like vultures. Your father profited from her brother's death. Marco had never asked where the money came from. Never wanted to know. He'd been too busy consolidating power, eliminating rivals, building something that would last. Built on blood that wasn't his own. The knock came at noon.
Soft tentative. Papa.
Aurora's voice filtered through the door. Are you okay? He wasn't. But he unlocked the door anyway. Aurora stood in the hallway, wearing a simple cotton dress, her hair braided. She looked young. Fragile. Nothing like the girl who'd blocked strikes in the basement. I've made a decision, Marco said. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened on the doorframe. You can continue training with Isolde, he continued. Under conditions. I supervise. If I think you're in danger, it stops immediately. Understood? Aurora's face transformed. The smile that broke across it was so pure, so genuinely happy, that Marco felt something crack inside his chest. Thank you, Papa, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, he said quietly. You might hate me for this before it's over. 2 hours later, Marco stood on the second-floor balcony, overlooking the mansion's inner courtyard. Below, Isolde was arranging something on the cobblestones, a path of objects Marco couldn't quite identify from this distance. Aurora emerged from the side entrance, guided by Isolde's hand. What is this? Marco called down. Isolde looked up. If she was surprised by his presence, she didn't show it. The first real lesson. I said I'd supervise. That includes knowing what you're teaching her. Then watch, Isolde said simply. She led Aurora to the beginning of the path. Marco could see it clearly now, a winding trail marked by small bells tied to stakes at varying heights. Between the bells, Isolde had scattered what looked like broken glass. Are you insane? Marco's hands gripped the balcony railing. She'll cut herself. The glass is tempered and filed smooth, Isolde called back. It won't cut, but it will crunch under her feet if she steps wrong. Aurora needs to learn to move silently. To understand that every step she takes creates sound, and sound creates location. Marco wanted to stop this. Every instinct screamed at him to run down there and pull Aurora away. But he'd made a promise. Aurora, Isolde said, her voice dropping to a tone Marco had to strain to hear. Close your eyes. They don't work anyway, Aurora said with a small smile. I know. But the gesture helps you focus. Sight is a distraction you don't have. Use that advantage. Isolde stepped back. This path is 10 meters long. 9 bells mark the route. Your goal is to reach the end without ringing a single bell or stepping on any glass. How am I supposed to know where they are? Listen, Isolde picked up a small stone and tossed it underhand. It arced through the air and struck the first bell, which chimed softly. Aurora's head turned toward the sound, tracking it. Sound travels, Isolde continued. It bounces off surfaces, absorbed by others. Metal rings. Stone doesn't. Glass crunches. Bells sing. Everything has a voice, Aurora. You just need to learn the language. She tossed another stone. Another bell chimed, farther along the path. This is impossible, Aurora said, but there was excitement in her voice, not fear. Nothing is impossible, Isolde replied. It's just difficult. There's a difference. Now, she moved to stand at the path's end. Walk toward my voice. But listen to everything else. Aurora took a breath. Stepped forward. Her foot landed on cobblestone.
Safe.
Second step. Still good. On the third step, her foot grazed something. A bell tinkled softly. Stop, Isolde commanded. What did you learn? The bell is lower than I thought. Ankle height.
Good.
Adjust your expectations. Again. Marco watched his daughter navigate the path with agonizing slowness. She rang 4 more bells in the first attempt, stepped on glass twice, the crunch making her wince even though it didn't cut. Again, Isolde said when Aurora reached the end. They repeated the exercise. This time Aurora rang only 2 bells. Again. 1 bell. Again. Marco lost track of how many times Aurora walked that path. The sun climbed higher, then began its descent. Sweat darkened Aurora's dress. Her breathing grew labored. But she didn't complain. Didn't ask to stop. On what must have been the 20th attempt, something changed. Aurora paused at the start of the path, her head tilted in that peculiar way of hers. Then she made a soft clicking sound with her tongue, like someone calling a cat. The click echoed off the courtyard walls. She clicked again, turning her head slightly, listening to how the sound returned to her. Then she began to walk.
Not slowly this time.
Not hesitantly. She moved with purpose, her steps precise and measured. Her path curved around the first bell without her feet ever coming close. She stepped over the glass, as if she could see it, ducked under a bell Marco hadn't even noticed was hung at head height. She didn't ring a single one. When she reached Isolde at the end, she was smiling. I heard them, Aurora said breathlessly. When I made the clicking sound, I could hear where the bells were. The sound bounced back different, like they were shadows made of noise. Echo, Isolde said quietly. Bats use it to fly in darkness. Dolphins use it to hunt in murky water. You're learning to use it to see without sight. Marco's throat tightened. Aurora turned toward where he stood on the balcony, her clouded eyes finding him with eerie accuracy. Did you see, Papa? She called up. Did you see what I did? I saw, Marco managed. He saw his daughter walking through a world that should have been impossible for her to navigate. He saw her smiling, confident, alive in a way he'd never witnessed before. He saw that Isolde was teaching Aurora something more valuable than fighting. She was teaching her that blind didn't mean helpless. And Marco realized, with a mixture of wonder and terror, that he was watching his daughter transform into someone he didn't recognize. Someone stronger than he'd ever allowed himself to imagine. The rumor started in a dockside bar 3 nights later. A low-level enforcer named Enzo, drunk on cheap whiskey and cheaper wine, told his companion about something strange at the Bellini estate. His cousin worked kitchen staff there. Said the boss's blind kid was training with some woman. Not gentle exercises, real training.
Combat drill.
The companion, a runner for the Calabrese family, filed that information away. By morning, it had reached his boss. By afternoon, it had spread through the criminal network like blood in water. Marco first learned about it when Vitor walked into his office and closed the door with more force than necessary. We have a problem, Vitor said. Marco looked up from the shipping manifests he'd been reviewing. When don't we? This one's different. Vitor tossed a folder onto the desk. Intelligence reports from 3 separate sources, all saying the same thing. Everyone knows about Aurora's training. Marco's jaw tightened. How? Does it matter? Servants talk. Guards talk. Someone saw something and word spread. Vitor sat heavily. But here's the interesting part. No one's mocking us for it. What do you mean? I mean the other families aren't laughing about how Bellini's blind kid is playing fighter. They're concerned. Vitor leaned forward. Because 2 days ago, someone identified Isolde. The air in the room seemed to thin. Who knows? Marco asked quietly. Right now? Maybe a dozen people in the major families. But that number grows by the hour. Vitor pulled out a surveillance photo from the folder, Isolde walking through the mansion gates. Someone had circled her face in red. The Calabrese family has a soldier who used to bet on underground fights. He recognized her, ran it up the chain. Now everyone's asking the same question. Why is the White Wolf teaching Bellini's heir? Marco stood and walked to the window. The ground stretched out below, peaceful and green. Deceiving. What are they concluding? He asked. That you're preparing for war. The words hung in the air like smoke. Aurora's training isn't about war, Marco said. It's about keeping her safe. They don't see it that way. They see the White Wolf, a legendary fighter who disappeared, suddenly reappearing in your household. Training your daughter. Your heir, Vitor's voice hardened. Marco, listen to me. In our world, there's no such thing as defensive preparation. When a boss starts sharpening his weapons, everyone assumes he plans to use them. That's insane. That's survival, Vitor stood. 3 families have already increased their security. The Calabrese moved their operations out of the port's east section, our territory. They're consolidating, preparing for you to make a move. I'm not making any move. But they don't know that. All they see is you, suddenly teaching your blind daughter to fight. To them, it looks like you're building something. A weapon, a successor, a threat. Marco turned back to face his consigliera. What do you recommend? Honestly? I don't know. Vitor ran a hand through his gray hair. If you stop the training now, you look weak. Like you're backing down from a confrontation you never started. But if you continue, tensions escalate. Someone might decide to strike first before Aurora becomes whatever they think she's becoming. She's 12 years old. She's a Bellini. Age doesn't matter. Vitor moved to the door. I've doubled the perimeter guards. Added surveillance on the main roads leading to the estate. But Marco, if someone really wants to get to Aurora, walls won't stop them. You know that. After Vitor left, Marco stood alone in his office, staring at the surveillance photo of Isolde. Why is the White Wolf teaching Bellini's heir?
Because he'd asked her to.
Because his daughter had begged him. Because for the first time in years, he'd seen Aurora smile with genuine joy. Because he was tired of keeping her wrapped in cotton while the world sharpened its knives. His phone buzzed. A text from his head of security. Foreign vehicles spotted near South Perimeter. Diplomatic plates. Calabrese family, possibly. Moved on after 10 minutes. Marco's hand tightened on the phone. They were being watched. Assessed. Measured. Another text, this one from a contact in the Eastern District. Word on the street. Bellini's blind kid isn't so helpless anymore. Syndicate bosses asking questions. Lots of questions. Marco deleted both messages and walked out of his office. He found Aurora in the library, sitting by the window with a book in Braille. Isolde stood nearby, silent as always, her gray eyes tracking his entrance. Aurora, Marco said softly. His daughter's head turned toward him. Yes, Papa? He wanted to tell her everything. Wanted to explain that her training had become a political statement she never intended. That the world was watching now, interpreting her strength as a threat instead of a victory. He wanted to tell her to stop. But looking at her sitting there, her spine straight, her fingers moving across the rays with confidence, reading, learning, living in a way she never had before, he couldn't. How's the training going? He asked instead. Aurora's smile could have lit the room. Isolde says I'm improving. Yesterday, I could hear her heartbeat from 3 meters away. Did you know people's hearts have different rhythms? Hers is very slow, very controlled, like a drum that never speeds up. Marco glanced at Isolde, who met his gaze without expression. That's good, he said. That's very good. Are you okay, Papa? You sound worried. I'm always worried. He managed a smile she couldn't see. It's my job. After he left, Isolde moved to stand beside Aurora's chair. He's afraid, Aurora said quietly, her fingers still on the braille. Yes, Isolde agreed. Of what I'm becoming. Of what him allowing it means. Isolde paused. Your father has spent 12 years building walls around you. Now he's learning that the strongest protection isn't walls. It's making sure you don't need them. Aurora closed her book. The training is causing problems, isn't it? I can hear it in how everyone moves now. The guards are different. Faster. More tense. The world is reacting to change. That's normal. Is it dangerous? Isolde was quiet for a long moment. Yes, she said finally. But hiding from danger doesn't make it disappear. It just means you won't see it coming. I never see anything coming, Aurora said with a small, bitter laugh. You're wrong. Isolde's hand touched Aurora's shoulder briefly. You hear everything. And soon, that will be enough. Outside, beyond the mansion walls, the city watched and waited. In smoky back rooms and expensive restaurants, men who made their living from violence whispered about the Bellini family, about a blind girl learning to fight, about the white wolf emerging from her decade-long hibernation, about what it all meant, and slowly, inevitably, they began to prepare. Not for peace, for war. 5 days into the training, Isolde told Aurora they were going on a field trip. Marco didn't like it. She leaves this property. She needs a security detail, he said, standing in the entrance hall with his arms crossed. For men minimum.
No guards, Isolde replied calmly.
She was dressed in dark clothes, practical worn. Combat ready. Where we're going, armed men attract attention. Attention defeats the purpose. The purpose being what exactly? Teaching Aurora to function in chaos, Isolde adjusted the bag slung over her shoulder. Your mansion is controlled. Predictable. Every sound has its place. But the real world isn't like that. If Aurora is going to defend herself, she needs to learn how to hear through noise. Aurora stood between them, her head moving back and forth as they argued. She'd learned to track conversations by voice direction, another skill Isolde had taught her. Papa, she said quietly, I want to go. You don't know where you're going. Doesn't matter. Aurora's chin lifted. I trust Isolde. The words hit Marco harder than any punch. His daughter trusted this woman, this ghost with a violent past and secrets that still hadn't fully surfaced, more than she trusted his protective instincts. Maybe that said more about him than about Isolde. Fine, he said finally. But you're back before dark. And Aurora, he paused, struggling for words. Be careful. I'm always careful, Papa. No, Marco said softly. You're always brave. There's a difference. The industrial district sprawled on the city's eastern edge, a graveyard of failed factories and abandoned warehouses. Isolde led Aurora through rusted gates and past buildings with shattered windows, their footsteps echoing on broken concrete. Aurora walked with one hand on Isolde's arm, her free hand extended slightly, using the clicking technique she'd learned. Each click painted the world in echoes. Where are we? Aurora asked. An old textile warehouse. Been abandoned for 7 years. Perfect for what we need, Isolde guided her through a doorway. No one will bother us here. Inside, the warehouse was a cathedral of decay. Pigeons nested in the rafters. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. The air smelled of rust and rot and time. Aurora's clicking sounds bounced back strangely, distorted by the vast empty space. It's big, she said. Really big. 30 meters long, 20 wide, 10 high, Isolde led her to the center of the floor.
Now.
Tell me what you hear. Aurora tilted her head, listening. Water dripping. East side, I think. Something moving in the ceiling. Birds? You're breathing. My breathing, she paused. Traffic sounds from outside, but distant. Maybe half a kilometer.
Good.
Your baseline. Isolde stepped away. Now for the real test. She walked to the wall, where her bag waited. Aurora heard zippers opening. Metal scraping. What are you doing? Aurora asked. Teaching you chaos. The first sound was a radio, turned to static. White noise flooded the warehouse, bouncing off every surface. Aurora flinched, her hands going to her ears. Don't block it out, Isolde called over the noise. Learn to hear through it. A second sound joined the first, a mechanical banging, irregular and loud. Then a third, a speaker playing crowd noise, hundreds of overlapping voices. Aurora turned in circles, disoriented. The sounds crashed over her from every direction, layering on top of each other until she couldn't distinguish one from another. "Isolde," she called out. I can't hear you." No response. Aurora's heart began to race. She clicked her tongue, but the echo was lost in the chaos. Stepped forward and nearly tripped over something, a pipe or debris. This was wrong. This was too much. She wanted to cry out, to demand Isolde stop this, to listen. The words surfaced in her mind, not her own voice, but Isolde's from their training sessions. A strike announces itself before it touches you. Listen to what matters. Filter what doesn't. Aurora forced herself to breathe, to stop turning, to stand still. The noise didn't change, but something in her perception did. She stopped trying to hear everything and started listening for one thing. Footsteps. Human footsteps had a rhythm, a weight, a pattern that mechanical sounds didn't have.
There.
Beneath the static and the banging and the crowd noise, she heard it.
Soft.
Measured. Moving slowly around her in a circle. Isolde. Aurora turned to face the sound. I hear you. The footsteps stopped. Then they started again, faster now. Coming from a different angle. Aurora tracked them, her body turning to follow. Isolde was testing her, seeing if she could maintain focus. The footsteps stopped again. Aurora waited, holding her breath. The attack came from behind. Aurora felt the air displacement half a second before Isolde's hand would have touched her shoulder. She spun, her own hand coming up in the blocking motion they'd practiced, and caught Isolde's wrist. The noise cut out. Sudden silence filled the warehouse, so complete it felt like a physical presence. How did you do that? Isolde asked. Her voice held something Aurora had never heard before. Approval. I stopped listening to everything, Aurora said, her hand still gripping Isolde's wrist. Started listening for you. Your heartbeat is slower than mine. Your breathing is quieter. Your steps are lighter because you know how to move. Once I found those patterns, I could. She paused, searching for words. I could hear you underneath everything else. Isolde gently removed Aurora's hand from her wrist. Sit down. They sat together on the cold concrete floor, their backs against a wall. My brother couldn't do that, Isolde said quietly. Filter the noise. When they put him in that ring, there were 300 people screaming. He couldn't hear his opponent coming. Couldn't focus. The fear drowned out everything else. Aurora turned toward Isolde's voice. Is that why you're teaching me? Because of him? Partly. Isolde was quiet for a moment. I trained him wrong. I taught him to be strong when I should have taught him to be smart. Strength doesn't matter if you can't think under pressure. Were you there? When he... Yes, the single word carried years of weight. Aurora reached out slowly, her hand finding Isolde's arm. She didn't say anything, just touched her, letting her know she wasn't alone. You're scared too, Aurora said finally. Aren't you? It was the same thing she'd said during their training. But here, in this abandoned warehouse, it meant something different. Yes, Isolde admitted. I'm scared of failing you the way I failed him. You won't. You don't know that. I do, Aurora said with certainty. Because you're not teaching me to fight. You're teaching me to survive. There's a difference. Isolde's breath caught. Then she laughed, a short, sharp sound without humor. Your father was right, she said. You're stronger than anyone knows, including you. They sat in silence for a while, two people bound by training and trauma, teacher and student, haunted and hopeful. Finally, Isolde stood. One more test, then we go home. What test? Find me in the dark. The warehouse lights, what few still worked, went out. Aurora heard Isolde's footsteps retreating, then stopping somewhere in the vast space. No sounds this time, Isolde called out.
No clicking. No tricks.
Just your ears and my presence. Find me. Aurora stood slowly. The darkness around her was no different than any other darkness. She'd lived her whole life in the dark. But this time, she wasn't afraid of it. She began to walk. The emissary arrived on a Thursday evening during dinner. Marco heard the commotion from the dining room, raised voices at the front gate. His security teams clipped radio chatter. He set down his fork and met Vitor's eyes across the table. "Stay here," he told Aurora, who sat to his right, her fingers delicately navigating her plate. "Something's wrong," she said. It wasn't a question. "Just business," Marco stood. "Isolde, stay with her." The maid materialized from the shadows near the doorway. She'd been there the whole meal, silent as always. She nodded once. Marco walked through the mansion's corridors with Vitor at his side, for armed guards falling in behind them. The military precision of it was second nature now. Violence choreographed before it even began. In the entrance hall, a man waited. He was tall, expensively dressed in a gray suit that probably cost more than most cars. His face was forgettable, the kind that blended into crowds deliberately. But his eyes were cold and professional. Behind him, visible through the still-open front doors, 3 black SUVs idled in the circular driveway. At least a dozen men stood near the vehicles, hands near their waistbands. A show of force. "Mr. Bellini," the emissary said with a slight nod. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I don't recall inviting you onto my property," Marco replied evenly. "State your business or leave."
Direct.
"I appreciate that." The emissary pulled an envelope from his jacket, slowly, aware of the guns trained on him. "I represent a coalition of interests. Families who've noticed changes in your operation." "What changes?" "The White Wolf, for one." The emissary's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Quite a bold move, bringing her into your household. Training your heir. It sends a message." "I'm not sending any message." "Aren't you?" The emissary placed the envelope on the marble hall table. "Regardless of your intentions, the message has been received. Several families interpret your actions as preparation for territorial expansion. They've asked me to extend an invitation." Marco didn't touch the envelope. "What kind of invitation?" "A formal challenge. Tournament rules. Single combat. Winner takes the disputed territories in the Port District, specifically the East Section warehouses and shipping lanes." The room went very quiet. "I don't have disputed territories," Marco said carefully. "The East Section is mine. Has been for 6 years." "Was yours," the emissary corrected. Past tense. 3 families have jointly claimed it as of this morning. They're offering you a chance to win it back. Honorably. Without war. Vitor stepped forward. "This is insane. You can't just." "We can." Actually, the emissary's voice hardened. "You've been spending resources on training. On preparation. You've brought in the most dangerous underground fighter of the last decade. You're building something, Mr. Bellini. The other families have decided not to wait and see what. So they're forcing a confrontation," Marco said. "They're offering you a civilized alternative to bloodshed." The emissary gestured to the envelope. "Details are inside. The tournament will be held in 8 days. Neutral ground. Each side provides a champion. Standard rules. First blood, knockout, or submission." Marco's jaw clenched. This was a trap. Had to be. Tournament rules meant nothing to men who made their living breaking rules. But refusing would mean war. Real war. His estate sieged, his people killed, Aurora.
His daughter.
The emissary's smile widened slightly, reading Marco's thoughts on his face. "They know about your daughter, of course," the emissary said softly. "Such a brave girl. Learning to fight despite her limitations. Everyone's very impressed. It would be a shame if this conflict escalated and she was caught in the crossfire. Children suffer most in wars, don't they?" Marco moved before he realized it. He had the emissary against the wall, forearm pressed against his throat, his own gun drawn and pressed under the man's jaw. Behind him, the guards' weapons came up, and through the open door, the armed men by the SUVs did the same. "You threaten my daughter," Marco whispered, "and I'll kill every single person you've ever cared about. Slowly. Starting with you." The emissary didn't struggle. Didn't even seem frightened. "I'm not threatening anyone," he said calmly despite the pressure on his throat. I'm explaining reality. You have 8 days to decide. Accept the challenge and settle this honorably, or reject it and face the consequences. Those are your options. Marco held him there for another heartbeat, then shoved him away. The emissary straightened his suit, still smiling. One more thing, he said, walking toward the door. The tournament location? It's the same underground arena where they held the championship 10 years ago. The one where the White Wolf lost her brother. I'm sure she'll remember it fondly. He paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the evening light. 8 days, Mr. Bellini. We'll be waiting. Then he was gone, climbing into the lead SUV. The convoy pulled away, disappearing down the tree-lined drive. Marco stood in the entrance hall, his gun still in his hand, his heart hammering. Boss, Vitor said carefully. What do we do? Marco looked at the envelope on the table. He didn't need to open it. He knew what it would say. We accept, he said finally. That's suicide. It's obviously a setup. If we refuse, they'll come for us anyway. But this way, we have a chance. Marco slid the gun back into his holster. They want a champion? We'll give them 1 inch. Who? Vitor asked. None of our soldiers are trained for tournament combat. Not against the kind of fighters they'll bring. Marco didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about Aurora in the basement, blocking strikes she couldn't see. About Isolde teaching her to hear, through chaos. About the White Wolf, undefeated in 47 fights. About how far he would go to protect his daughter. I need to speak with Isolde, he said quietly. Marco.
Now.
He found them in Aurora's room. His daughter sat on her bed, still dressed for dinner, her clouded eyes fixed toward the window. Isolde stood nearby, her posture alert. They'd heard everything. Of course they had. Papa, Aurora said before he could speak. What did that man want? Marco crossed to her bedside and knelt, taking her hands in his. They were small, delicate, unmarked by the violence that defined his world.
For now.
There's going to be a fight, he said gently. A formal challenge. It's complicated, but... He mentioned me, Aurora interrupted. I heard him. He was threatening me. I won't let anyone hurt you. I know, Aurora squeezed his hands. But Papa, this is because of my training, isn't it? Because people know about Isolde. About what she's teaching me. Marco couldn't lie to her. Yes. Aurora was quiet for a moment. Then she turned toward where Isolde stood. The arena, she said. The one he mentioned. That's where your brother died. Yes, Isolde said softly. And now my father has to fight there, because of me. No, Marco's voice was firm. This isn't your fault, Aurora. These men were looking for an excuse. Any excuse. You're just the weakest target, Aurora finished. Her voice didn't waver. The blind daughter. The easiest way to hurt you. She pulled her hands free from Marco's grip and stood. Then I'm tired of being weak, she said. Tired of being the reason you're afraid. Aurora. Isolde. Aurora turned toward her teacher. How long until I'm ready? Really ready. Isolde met Marco's eyes over Aurora's head. Something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition. 8 days, Isolde said. Maybe. Then we have 8 days, Aurora said simply. Teach me everything. Aurora didn't sleep that night. Instead, she lay in her bed, listening to the mansion breathe around her. The guards pacing the perimeter. The wind in the courtyard trees. Her father's footsteps in his study directly below, pacing, stopping, pacing again. And underneath it all, the steady, quiet rhythm of Isolde's breathing from the chair in the corner. You don't have to stay, Aurora said into the darkness. I'm not afraid of being alone. I know, Isolde replied. I'm not here because you're afraid. Then why? A long pause. Because I am. Aurora sat up, her feet finding the cool floor. Of what? Of history repeating itself. Isolde's voice was barely above a whisper. Your father will ask me to fight in that arena. He hasn't yet, but he will. And I'll have to go back to the place where everything ended. You don't have to say yes. Yes, I do, the chair creaked as Isolde shifted. Because if I don't, he'll send someone else. Someone less capable. And they'll die. Aurora stood and navigated to where Isolde sat, her hands finding the armrests of the chair. She knelt in front of her teacher, the position reversing their usual dynamic. "Tell me what really happened," Aurora said quietly. "Not the version everyone knows. The truth." Isolde was silent for so long Aurora wondered if she'd refuse. Then she began to speak. "Luca was 14, Isolde said. Small for his age. Bad lungs since birth, probably why he got sick so easily. But he was smart, really smart, wanted to be an engineer. Build bridges." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I fought so he could have that dream. So he wouldn't end up like me, solving problems with fists instead of blueprints." Aurora listened, not moving. "When he needed the surgery, I had two choices. Watch him die slowly, or fight in the underground championship. 5 fights. Brutal ones. Against opponents who'd killed before." Isolde's breathing quickened. "I told him to stay away from the tournament. Made him promise. But he was 14 and stubborn, and he didn't understand what those fights really were. He came anyway. Last night. Finals night. I'd won 4 fights, barely got touched. I was focused. In control. And then," Isolde's voice went hollow. "Then I saw him in the crowd. This skinny kid in a crowd of killers. Someone had brought him there deliberately. As leverage." Aurora's hands tightened on the armrests. "They told me before my fight. Throw it or Luca goes into a ring. Against a fighter named Constantine. A psychopath who'd killed 3 men in tournaments before." Isolde's breath shuddered. "They gave me 30 seconds to decide." "What did you do?" "I tried to throw it. I swear I tried." Isolde's voice broke. "But my opponent didn't know about the deal. He came at me full force. And my body, my training, it just reacted. Muscle memory.
Survival instinct.
I won in 90 seconds. Perfect execution." The silence stretched. "And while you were winning?" "While I was winning, they put Luca in the ring with Constantine." Isolde's words came faster now, desperate to get them out. "I heard the roar from the crowd. Different from my fight. Louder. Crueler. I ran. Fought through security. But by the time I got there..."
She stopped.
"He wasn't built for fighting," Isolde whispered. "Didn't know how to protect himself. Didn't understand that begging for mercy only makes men like Constantine hit harder. The last thing my brother said before he died was 'I'm sorry,' like it was his fault. Like he'd failed me." Aurora felt wetness on her cheeks. She didn't know when she'd started crying. "There was another fighter in that ring that night," Isolde continued. "Before Luca. A blind fighter. Young man, maybe 20. He'd been good once, before he lost his sight in a car accident. Kept fighting anyway, out of pride or desperation or stupidity. Luca was in the crowd when that fighter got destroyed. Beaten so badly, he never walked again." Aurora's breath caught. "Luca saw that and understood something I'd never told him, that strength without preparation is suicide. That being brave doesn't matter if you can't defend yourself." Isolde's voice strengthened slightly. "When they threw him in that ring, he was trying to fight like he'd seen me fight. Trying to be strong. But he had no training. No foundation. Just courage. And courage alone got him killed. That's why you're teaching me," Aurora said. "Not just to fight. To survive." "Yes." Isolde reached out and touched Aurora's face, her calloused fingers gentle. "I won't train you to be brave. You're already brave. I'm training you to be disciplined. To be smart. To know the difference between a fight you can win and one you should avoid. And this tournament? The one my father's been challenged to? It's the same arena. Same rules. Same men running it." Isolde's hand dropped. "Your father's family funded that championship. His father's money paid for the ring where Luca died. Marco probably didn't know the details. Probably just signed off on entertainment investments, but the blood is still on Bellini hands." Aurora absorbed this. "Does my father know you know?" "I think he suspects. He went to the old boxing gym. Someone there would have told him." Isolde stood, moving to the window. "He's waiting for me to demand revenge." To use this tournament as an excuse to hurt him the way he hurt me. Will you? No, Isolde turned back. Because revenge doesn't bring back the dead. It just creates more bodies. And because she paused. Because your father is trying to be better than he was. Better than his father. He's trying to protect you in a world that doesn't forgive weakness. I can hate what his family did and still respect what he's trying to do now. Aurora stood and walked to Isolde, finding her hand in the darkness. Promise me something, Aurora said. What? Promise me that if I'm trained, really trained, I won't be a burden anymore. I won't be the weakness people use against my father. Isolde was quiet for a long moment. I promise, she said finally. But Aurora, you need to promise me something too. What? Promise that you won't confuse being strong with being willing to die. They're not the same thing. Luca died because he tried to be strong when he should have been smart enough to survive. Aurora thought about this. About the difference between courage and wisdom. Between fighting and living. I promise, she said. Isolde pulled her into an embrace, brief, tight, fierce. Then we start at dawn, Isolde said. And I teach you everything I know, not as a maid teaching a blind girl, but as a master teaching her student. For the first time since that night in the basement, Isolde called Aurora what she'd been becoming all along. Not a victim, not a burden, a fighter. Marco found Aurora on the mansion's balcony the next morning, facing the sunrise she couldn't see. She'd been up for hours. He could tell by the way she held herself, alert but tired. Isolde had probably already put her through drills. His daughter was changing before his eyes, her posture straighter, her movements more deliberate. It terrified him. We need to talk, Marco said. Aurora's head turned slightly. About the tournament. About you staying far away from the tournament. Marco moved to stand beside her at the railing. I've made arrangements. Vitor will take you to our property in the mountains. You'll be safe there while this. No. The single word stopped him cold. Aurora, this isn't a discussion. You're right. It's not. She turned to face him fully, her clouded eyes finding him with eerie precision. I'm not running away while you fight a war that started because of me. This war didn't start because of you. Yes, it did. Aurora's voice was steady, controlled. They challenged you because I'm your weakness. Because I'm blind and helpless and the easiest way to break you. You know it. I know it. Everyone knows it. Marco's jaw clenched. You are not a weakness. Then stop treating me like one. The sudden force in her voice made him step back. Stop trying to hide me away every time there's danger. Stop surrounding me with guards and walls and lies about how everything's fine. I'm protecting you. You're suffocating me. Aurora's hands gripped the balcony railing. Do you know what it's like? Being 12 years old and knowing that every bad thing that happens to your family is because you exist? That every threat, every challenge, every problem traces back to the blind daughter who can't take care of herself. Aurora. I heard them, Papa, her voice broke slightly. The guards. They don't think I can hear them talking, but I hear everything. They call me the liability. They take bets on how long before someone kidnaps me. They joke about how much easier your life would be if I'd never been born. The words hit Marco like physical blows. Who? He demanded, fury rising in his chest. Which guard said that? It doesn't matter which ones. Aurora's hands shook on the railing. They're not wrong. I am a liability. I do make everything harder. And you know what the worst part is? You agree with them. You just won't say it out loud. That's not true. Then why do you look at me like I'm going to break? Aurora's voice went quiet, devastated. Every single day, Papa. Every time something goes wrong, you look at me like I'm made of glass. Like I'm something precious and fragile that has to be wrapped up and hidden away. But I'm not glass. I'm your daughter. And I'm so tired of being afraid that my existence costs you everything. Marco felt something crack inside his chest. He reached for Aurora, but she pulled away. Don't, she whispered. Don't comfort me. Don't tell me it's okay. Just tell me the truth for once. Tell me you wish I could see. Tell me you wish I was normal. Tell me you wouldn't trade everything to have a daughter who wasn't. Her voice broke. Wasn't broken. You're not broken. Then why are you sending me away? The question hung between them, sharp and accusing. Marco opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Because I'm afraid, he said finally. Aurora went still. I'm afraid every single day, Marco continued, his voice rough. Not of my enemies. Not of death or war, or losing my empire. I'm afraid of failing you, of not being enough, of waking up one morning and finding out someone hurt you because I wasn't strong enough to stop them. He moved to lean against the railing, suddenly exhausted. You want the truth? Here it is. You are not a weakness. You're not a liability. You're the only good thing I've ever made in this world. Everything else, the money, the power, the respect, it's all built on blood and fear and choices I can't take back. His hands clenched. But you're proof that I'm not completely lost. That some part of me is still capable of creating something beautiful.
Papa.
Let me finish, Marco's voice cracked. That tournament they challenged me to? The arena where it's being held? I financed it. 10 years ago, when my father was grooming me to take over. He said it was business, just entertainment for wealthy clients. I signed the papers. I took the money it generated. I built part of my empire on the blood that was spilled there. Aurora's breath caught. Isolde's brother died in that arena, Marco continued. A 14-year-old boy who was thrown into a ring as leverage against his sister. And his voice broke. I profited from his death. I used that money to secure my position, to buy loyalty, to build the world you were born into. Tears were streaming down his face now, silent and unchecked. So, when you ask me why I look at you like you're going to break, it's because you're the only pure thing in my life. The only piece of me that isn't stained with blood. And I can't, he struggled for words. I can't let this world take that away. I can't let my sins destroy you too. Aurora stood frozen, her own tears falling. But Papa, she whispered, don't you see? You already are destroying me. Not with danger. With protection. You're so afraid of losing me to violence that you're suffocating me with safety. She moved toward him, her hands finding his arms. I don't need you to keep me innocent, she said. I need you to help me survive. I need you to see me as someone who can be strong, not just someone who needs to be protected. Marco pulled her into his arms, holding his daughter like she was the only solid thing in a crumbling world. I'm so sorry, he whispered into her hair. For everything. For the choices I made. For the world you were born into. For not being the father you deserved. You're exactly the father I need, Aurora said against his chest. You just have to trust that I can be the daughter you need too. They stood together on the balcony, two people trying to bridge the gap between love and fear, protection and freedom. Finally, Marco pulled back, wiping his eyes. If you stay, he said carefully. If I let you be part of this, you follow Isolde's instructions exactly.
No improvising. No heroics.
Understood? Aurora's face transformed with a smile that could have lit the world. Understood, she said. Behind them, unnoticed, Isolde stood in the doorway. She'd heard everything. And for the first time in 10 years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this time she could save someone. This time, the student wouldn't die. This time, she wouldn't fail. The storm hit on the 7th night, earlier than the forecast predicted. Lightning split the sky like fractures in glass. Thunder shook the mansion's foundations. Rain hammered down in sheets, so thick it turned the world into water. Perfect conditions. Isolde appeared in Aurora's doorway at midnight, silent as always despite the storm's rage. Get dressed, she said.
Combat clotte.
We're going to the roof. Aurora sat up, instantly alert. 7 days of intensive training had sharpened her instincts to a razor's edge. The roof? In this weather? Especially in this weather. Tomorrow is the tournament. Tonight is your final test. Isolde's voice was flat, emotionless. The voice she used when something was deadly serious. If you fail, you're not ready. And if you're not ready, You stay here while I go to that arena alone. Aurora was dressed in 3 minutes. They moved through the mansion like ghosts, past sleeping guards and silent rooms. Marco had wanted to supervise, but Isolde had forbidden it. This test required isolation. No safety net. No father watching from the balcony, ready to intervene. The rooftop access was through a service door in the mansion's east wing. Isolde led Aurora up narrow stairs that spiraled into darkness, then through a metal door that shrieked in protest as it opened. The storm hit them like a physical force. Rain lashed Aurora's face, instantly soaking her clothes. Wind threatened to push her backward. Thunder detonated overhead, so loud it felt like the sky was tearing apart. She couldn't hear anything else. Couldn't use her clicking technique. Couldn't track sounds beneath the chaos. She was functionally deaf. This is the real world. Isolde shouted over the storm. Aurora barely heard her. Not a controlled mansion. Not a quiet basement. This. Chaos.
Noise.
Confusion. If you can fight here, you can fight anywhere. Aurora felt Isolde's hand leave her arm. She was alone. Find me. Isolde's voice came from somewhere to the left. Or was it the right? The storm distorted everything. And when you find me, survive what comes next. Aurora stood frozen for a heartbeat, rain streaming down her face, her carefully developed acoustic map of the world completely useless. 7 days of training. 7 days of learning to hear through noise, to feel air displacement, to track heartbeats beneath chaos. All of it worthless in this storm. No, not worthless. Just harder. Aurora forced herself to breathe. To think. The rooftop gym Isolde had mentioned was up here. She could feel different surfaces beneath her feet. Smooth tile giving way to rubberized mats. Equipment that her shins bumped against. The space was maybe 20 meters across. Surrounded by a low wall, she'd felt it briefly when they first emerged. Dangerous in this wind and rain. One wrong step, and she'd fall 3 stories to the courtyard below. Aurora clicked her tongue experimentally. Nothing. The echo was swallowed by rain and thunder. She tried again louder. Still nothing useful.
Fine. No echolocation.
What else did she have? The rain itself. Rain made sound when it hit different surfaces. Metal rang. Wood thumped. Fabric rustled. Flesh made a softer patter. Aurora stood still and listened not for silence, but for variation in the noise. The rain fell everywhere, a constant roar. But over there, to her left, the pattern changed slightly. The rain was hitting something that moved. Something warm that generated subtle air currents. Isolde. Aurora began walking toward the variation, her feet testing each step carefully. Her hands extended, feeling for obstacles. The attack came without warning. Something struck her shoulder, hard enough to spin her around but not injure. A training baton. Isolde was using the same weapons from their first lesson. Aurora caught her balance just before the second strike came from the opposite direction. She ducked on instinct, feeling the baton whistle past where her head had been. Good. Isolde's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. But not enough. I'm not your only problem tonight. Aurora heard it then, other footsteps. Lighter than Isolde's. Multiple sets. Her heart rate spiked. Who? Training partners. Isolde shouted. 4 of them. Soldiers from your father's guard. They've agreed to help with your final test. They won't seriously hurt you, but they won't go easy either. Defend yourself. For opponents.
Plus Isolde.
In a storm. On a rooftop. While blind. This was insane. This was impossible. Aurora felt something shift inside her. The panic that had been rising suddenly crystallized into cold focus. You are not helpless, she told herself. You are not weak. You are Aurora Bellini, and you are not born to be a victim. She dropped into the fighting stance Isolde had drilled into her body until it became muscle memory. Low center of gravity. Hands up, but relaxed. Weight on the balls of her feet. Listening. The first attacker came from her right. She heard his boots squelch on the wet mat a fraction of a second before he struck. She pivoted, letting his momentum carry him past her, and struck the pressure point behind his knee that Isolde had taught her. He went down with a grunt. The second attacker was smarter, approaching from behind while she was distracted. But Aurora heard his breathing change, the slight acceleration that came before a strike. She dropped flat, and his baton passed over her. From the ground, she swept his legs. 2 down. Thunder exploded overhead, disorienting her. In that moment of confusion, the third attacker struck, catching her across the ribs. Pain flared, but Aurora turned it into movement, rolling away and coming up in a crouch. The rain had plastered her hair to her face. Her clothes clung to her body, heavy and restrictive. She was breathing hard, her ribs aching. And she was smiling, because for the first time in her life, Aurora felt truly alive. The fourth attacker came with the third, coordinating their strikes. Aurora heard them moving together, trying to box her in. She did something Isolde had specifically told her never to do. She clicked her tongue as loud as she could. The click was swallowed by thunder, but in the half-second before the sound died, Aurora caught the barest echo from both attackers' positions. She moved between them. They struck simultaneously, their batons cracking against each other as Aurora slipped through the gap they'd created. She used their confusion to strike both, quick jabs to nerve clusters that Isolde had made her practice thousands of times. They staggered back. Aurora spun, searching for Isolde, and found her by the simple fact that everyone else had stopped moving. The master stood at the rooftop's edge, rain streaming down her face, baton held loosely in one hand. "Come on then," Isolde said quietly. Somehow Aurora heard her despite the storm. "Show me what you've learned." Aurora advanced slowly, carefully. Isolde was different from the guards. Faster. More experienced. More dangerous. This wouldn't be like the others. Isolde attacked like lightning, 3 strikes in the span of a heartbeat. Aurora blocked the first, dodged the second, but the third caught her shoulder. She ignored the pain and countered, her own baton whipping toward Isolde's midsection. Isolde blocked easily, then pressed the attack. She was relentless, each strike flowing into the next, forcing Aurora backward toward the rooftop's edge. Aurora's heel touched the low wall. One more step and she'd fall. Isolde struck high, a killing blow if this were real. Aurora dropped under it, her hands finding Isolde's forward wrist. She twisted, using a joint lock Isolde had taught her just 3 days ago, and pulled. Isolde's balance broke. Aurora pivoted, reversing their positions. Now Isolde was the one against the wall, off balance, vulnerable. Aurora's baton came up, stopping a centimeter from Isolde's throat. They froze that way, both breathing hard, rain pouring down. Then Isolde smiled, a real smile, warm and proud. "Disarm me," she said. Aurora adjusted her grip and applied pressure to the nerve in Isolde's wrist. The baton fell from her teacher's hand. Aurora caught it before it hit the ground. For the first time in their training, she held Isolde by the wrist with one hand, a weapon in the other. The storm raged around them. Lightning illuminated everything in stark, white flashes. "You are ready," Isolde whispered. The words hit Aurora harder than any strike could have. She lowered her weapon. Behind them, the 4 guards picked themselves up, laughing and groaning in equal measure. One of them, a veteran named Carlo, shook his head in amazement. "Boss is gonna flip when he hears about this," he said. "The kid's a natural." "Not a natural," Isolde corrected, retrieving her baton. "A student. There's a difference." She turned back to Aurora. "Tomorrow, you'll see what everything you've learned really means. Tomorrow, you'll understand why I trained you so hard." Isolde's hand found Aurora's shoulder. "But tonight? Tonight you proved something I wasn't sure could be proven." "What?" "That strength has nothing to do with what you can see," Isolde said. "And everything to do with what you refuse to become." They walked back down together, leaving the storm behind. Tomorrow, they would face the arena. Tomorrow, history would try to repeat itself. But tonight, Aurora Bellini had become something her enemies never expected. A fighter who couldn't be broken by darkness. because she'd lived in darkness her entire life. The underground coliseum hadn't changed in 10 years. Isolde knew because she'd seen it in her nightmares every single night since Luca died. The same concrete walls stained with rust and old blood. The same flickering fluorescent lights that turned everything the color of corpses. The same iron smell of violence that had seeped into the foundation. Marco walked beside her through the entrance tunnel, Aurora between them. Behind them, Vitor and 8 armed guards formed a protective wall. "It's colder than I expected," Aurora said quietly. Her hand rested lightly on Isolde's arm for guidance, but her posture was straight, confident. She wore dark clothes, practical, flexible. Her hair pulled back in the same severe ponytail Isolde favored. They looked like what they were, teacher and student. "Underground spaces hold cold," Isolde replied. Her voice was steady, but Marco noticed her hand had drifted to her belt, where no weapon waited. "Old habits. The arena is 50 meters ahead. 2 entrances, this one, and the competitors' gate on the opposite side." "How many people?" Aurora asked. "Last time? 300. Tonight?" Isolde paused, listening to the echoes ahead.
"More.
"Maybe 500. Word spread." They emerged into the main chamber, and Marco felt his stomach turn. The arena was a pit, literally. A sunken ring surrounded by rising tiers of concrete benches packed with people. Rich and poor, criminals and civilians, all united by their hunger for violence. At the far end, in a private box elevated above the masses, sat the syndicate representatives. Marco recognized 2 of them, Antonio Calabrese, head of the Calabrese family, and Dmitry Volkov, a Russian oligarch with ties to half the smuggling operations in Eastern Europe. The third man he didn't know, but the way the others deferred to him suggested power. "That's interesting," Vitor muttered. "They brought someone new. Someone big." The emissary from before appeared at their side, his forgettable face wearing an unforgettable smile. "Mr. Bellini, so glad you accepted our invitation." He gestured toward the arena. "Your champion may prepare in the south gate. We'll begin in 10 minutes. "Where's your champion?" Marco asked. "Already prepared. Eager." Even the emissary's smile widened. "He's fought in 3 tournaments this year. Undefeated. I think you'll find him formidable." Isolde's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. They were led to a concrete room beneath the arena, bare except for a wooden bench and a single light bulb. The door closed behind them, leaving just Marco, Aurora, Isolde, and Vitor. "Something's wrong," Isolde said immediately. "This is wrong." "What do you mean?" Marco asked. "The setup. The crowd size. The new player in the syndicate box." Isolde moved to the door, testing it. "Locked from the outside. Tournament rules are sacred in underground fighting. The one thing everyone respects because it prevents all-out war. But this," she turned back. "This feels like theater. Like they're putting on a show for someone." "For who?" Before Isolde could answer, the lights went out. Not just in their room. Everywhere. The entire arena plunged into darkness. Aurora's hand found Isolde's instantly. "What's happening?" "Ambush," Isolde said flatly. The door exploded inward. Men poured through. Marco counted at least a dozen in the first wave. They wore night vision goggles, moved with military precision. This wasn't a tournament challenge. It was an execution. "Aurora, behind me." Marco drew his gun, firing twice. 2 men dropped, but there were too many and they were too prepared. Someone hit the lights, emergency floods that turned the darkness into blinding white. In the arena above, chaos erupted. The crowd screamed. More armed men appeared in the stands, blocking exits. "It's a setup," Vitor roared, firing at the attackers. "They never wanted a tournament. They wanted us contained." An attacker lunged at Marco from the side. He turned to fire. And Aurora stepped between them. The movement was so fast, so precise, that Marco didn't understand it until it was over. Aurora had caught the attacker's knife arm, twisted it using the joint lock Isolde taught her, and struck a pressure point that dropped him like a puppet with cut strings. All of it executed perfectly, instinctively. without seeing a single thing. Aurora, Marco started. Papa, move. Aurora shoved him aside just as gunfire tore through where he'd been standing. Isolde was already moving, a weapon, acquired from a fallen attacker, in her hands. She fought like Marco had never seen anyone fight. Efficient, brutal, every movement economical, lethal. The White Wolf wasn't a nickname. It was a warning. 3 more attackers went down in as many seconds. But they kept coming. Too many. This wasn't just the Calabrese family. This was multiple syndicates coordinating an attack. We're pinned, Vitor called out. We need to reach the main exit. No, Isolde cut him off. They're hurting us. This room is a kill box. We go up. Up where? The arena floor. If they wanted us dead immediately, they would have bombed this room. They want a public. Want everyone to see the Bellini family fall. Isolde grabbed Aurora's hand. Which means they won't fire into the crowd. Too many witnesses. Too many important people who take offense to being endangered. That's insane. It's the only way. Isolde looked at Marco. Trust me. Marco saw something in her eyes then. The same cold calculation he recognized in himself. The ability to make impossible choices without hesitation. He nodded. They burst through the doorway together, Isolde leading, Aurora's hand in hers, Marco and Vitor covering their retreat with suppressing fire. The tunnel to the arena floor stretched ahead, 50 meters that might as well have been a kilometer. Attackers appeared from side passages. Isolde cut through them like water, Aurora moving with her in perfect synchronization. They trained together so intensively that Aurora could anticipate Isolde's movements, adjusting her own position to stay clear of the combat while remaining protected. They emerged into the arena floor, and the crowd's roar hit them like a physical wave. 500 people watching. Cameras recording. Multiple syndicate bosses in attendance. The attackers poured out behind them, at least 30 armed men. And Marco understood Isolde's strategy. This wasn't about escape. It was about exposure. Whatever the syndicates had planned, they couldn't execute it cleanly now. Not with this many witnesses. Not with their ambush turned into a public spectacle. Aurora, Isolde said quietly. Stay close. Listen for my voice.
Can you do that?
Yes. Good. Isolde's hand tightened on her weapon. Because things are about to get very loud. The lead attacker, a massive man with a scarred face, stepped forward. He barked orders in Russian. His men spread out, surrounding the arena floor. In the syndicate box, Marco saw the unknown man stand. He spoke into a radio. More men appeared, blocking every exit. At least 60 now. Maybe 70. This wasn't an ambush anymore. It was a siege. Marco moved closer to Aurora, his gun trained on the nearest threats. I'm sorry, he whispered to his daughter. I'm so sorry I brought you into this. Aurora's clouded eyes turned toward him, and incredibly, she smiled. Papa, she said calmly, you didn't bring me into this. I chose to be here. And I'm not afraid. She clicked her tongue, once, sharp and clear. The sound echoed through the arena, mapping the space. Every attacker's position. Every obstacle. Every possible line of movement. 63 hostiles, Aurora said quietly. 12 have direct line of sight to us. The rest are positioned to cut off retreat. They're expecting us to run. Marco stared at his daughter. How? I've been listening since we entered, Aurora said simply. Counting footsteps. Tracking breath patterns. This is just a bigger version of the rooftop. In the silence that followed, something shifted. The attackers saw what the crowd saw, a blind 12-year-old girl standing calmly in the center of an arena, surrounded by armed men, utterly unafraid. And suddenly, they weren't sure. Isolde stepped forward, her voice carrying across the arena. 10 years ago, she called out, a boy died in this ring. His name was Luca. He was 14 years old. His only crime was having a sister these syndicates wanted to control. The crowd went silent. Tonight, you tried the same strategy. Attack, through the family. Through the weak link. Through a blind girl who should have been helpless. Isolde's voice hardened. But Aurora Bellini is not helpless. And I am not the same woman who failed her brother. She turned to Aurora. Show them, she said simply. Aurora stepped forward, alone, into the center of the arena. And 73 armed men watched a blind girl and wondered which of them she could hear coming. The first attacker moved without orders, a young soldier, overconfident and impatient. He rushed Aurora from behind, knife drawn, certain this would be easy. Aurora heard his boots hit the concrete 3 steps before he reached her, heard the shift in his breathing, heard the whisper of the knife leaving its sheath. She stepped sideways. The attacker's momentum carried him past her. As he stumbled, confused, Aurora's hand shot out, a precise strike to the nerve cluster in his shoulder that Isolde had made her practice 10,000 times. His knife clattered to the ground. His arm went numb. Aurora picked up the knife and tossed it away, not keeping it. The crowd gasped. I don't want to hurt anyone, Aurora called out, her voice steady. But I will defend myself. And my family. In the syndicate box, the unknown man leaned forward, suddenly interested. Who else? Isolde asked quietly, her voice carrying. Who else wants to test a blind child? 2 more attackers moved, coordinated this time, approaching from opposite sides. Aurora clicked once and pivoted, putting both attackers in her acoustic map. When they struck, she wasn't there. She'd moved between them, her small size an advantage. She swept the first attacker's leg. He crashed down hard. The second she caught with an elbow to the solar plexus, exactly where Isolde had taught her. He folded, gasping. Aurora stood breathing hard, her clouded eyes scanning the arena, even though they saw nothing. She's reading them, someone in the crowd whispered. The words rippled through the stands. She's fighting blind. Marco watched his daughter, this small, fierce creature he'd spent 12 years trying to protect, and felt everything he thought he knew about strength shatter and rebuild itself. She wasn't helpless. She had never been helpless. He'd just been too afraid to see it. Enough. The unknown man's voice cut through the arena. He stood in the syndicate box, imperious and cold. This demonstration proves nothing.
Kill them.
All of them.
Now.
The attackers raised their weapons. And Marco realized they were going to die here. All of them. There were too many guns, too little cover, too. Stop. The word came from the arena entrance. Every head turned. A line of men emerged from the tunnel, not attackers, but Marco's own soldiers. 50 of them, heavily armed, led by his most trusted captain. But behind them came something unexpected. Uniformed police. Federal agents. 24 at least, weapons drawn. Nobody moves, the lead agent announced. This facility is surrounded. Anyone who fires a weapon will be charged with domestic terrorism. Confusion rippled through the crowd. The attackers hesitated, looking to their leaders for orders. In the syndicate box, the unknown man's face went pale. Vitor stepped forward, and Marco noticed for the first time that his consigliere was holding a phone. Recording. Did you get it all? Vitor asked the agent. Every word. Every face. Every illegal weapon, the agent smiled grimly. This is the biggest bust in organized crime history. Congratulations. You idiots gathered every major syndicate head in one place and recorded yourselves attempting mass murder. The unknown man tried to leave the box. 2 agents blocked his path. Going somewhere, Mr. Zhang? The agent asked. We've been trying to extradite you for 3 years. Thanks for making it easy.
Marco understood then.
Vitor had set this up. Had turned the ambush into a trap for the syndicates themselves. When? Marco asked quietly. The moment they issued the challenge, Vitor replied. I knew it was wrong. Too formal. Too public. So I made a deal. Immunity for the Bellini family in exchange for delivering every syndicate head in the city. He glanced at Aurora. I gambled that they'd try something exactly like this. That they'd be too arrogant to resist showing their power. You used us as bait. I used their arrogance against them, Vitor corrected. And it worked. The attackers were being disarmed and arrested. The crowd was being processed as witnesses. The syndicate bosses were being led away in handcuffs. Marco walked across the arena floor to where Aurora stood, still in her fighting stance, still ready. "It's over," he said softly. "You can rest now." Aurora's posture relaxed. Her hands started shaking, the adrenaline finally catching up to her. Marco pulled her into his arms, and this time, she let herself be small. Let herself be 12. Let herself be his daughter instead of a fighter. "I was so scared," she whispered against his chest. "You didn't look scared. That's because Isolde taught me that fear and action aren't the same thing. You can be terrified and still move forward." Aurora pulled back slightly. "Were you proud of me?" Marco's throat tightened. Proud doesn't begin to cover it. Isolde approached them slowly. She looked exhausted, the adrenaline leaving her too. "The White Wolf fights one last time," Marco said to her. "And this time, nobody dies." "This time," Isolde agreed. She looked at Aurora. "You were perfect. Every technique, every response, perfect. I had a good teacher." "You had discipline," Isolde corrected. "I just gave you tools. You chose to use them." Marco took a breath. This was the moment. The decision he'd been avoiding. "Stay," he said to Isolde. "Not as a maid. As Aurora's master. He struggled for words. As family. If you want." Isolde was quiet for a long moment, her gray eyes distant. "Your father's money killed my brother," she said finally. "I know. I came to your house planning to hate you. To find a way to make you suffer the way I suffered. I know that too. But then I met Aurora. And I saw a girl who'd spent 12 years being treated like she was broken, who was desperate to prove she wasn't." Isolde's voice softened. "I saw my brother. The determination. The courage. The refusal to accept limitations." She looked at Aurora, and something in her expression broke and healed simultaneously. "I can't bring Luca back," Isolde said. "Can't undo what happened. But maybe," she paused. "Maybe I can make sure Aurora never becomes a victim the way he did. Maybe I can teach her to be strong where he wasn't given the chance." "Is that a yes?" Aurora asked quietly. Isolde knelt in front of her student, taking her hands. "Yes," she said. "But not as your maid. And not as someone working for your father. As your teacher. Your master. And maybe," her voice caught, "maybe as someone who sees you the way Luca should have been seen. As someone capable of incredible things." Aurora threw her arms around Isolde, and the White Wolf, the legendary fighter who disappeared into grief and rage, held this blind girl and let herself believe in second chances. Marco watched them and understood what he'd been doing wrong all these years. He'd been buying power, building walls, collecting loyal soldiers and expensive weapons and political influence. But power wasn't strength. Strength was his daughter standing in an arena full of armed men and refusing to be a victim. Strength was a woman who'd lost everything teaching someone else not to fear loss. Strength was letting go of control long enough to trust that the people you love can protect themselves. "Come on," Vitor said, touching Marco's shoulder. "We need to give statements. This is going to take hours." "Let them wait." Marco looked at Aurora and Isolde, still embracing in the center of the arena, where blood had once been spilled. "This is more important." As federal agents processed the crime scene and reporters gathered outside, as syndicate empires crumbled and old debts came due, 3 people stood together in the place where violence had once destroyed a family, and chose to build something instead. Aurora pulled back from Isolde, smiling despite her tears. "So, what happens now?" she asked. Isolde stood, her hand still holding Aurora's. "Now? We train harder. You have discipline, but discipline without refinement is crude. We work on your speed, your precision, your ability to adapt." "I meant after," Aurora interrupted, laughing. "After all the training, what do I become?" Isolde considered this. Looked at Marco, who nodded. "You become whatever you choose," Isolde said finally. "A fighter. A leader. A woman who can't be broken by darkness, because she learned to make the darkness her ally." She squeezed Aurora's hand. "But first you become my student. Really and truly. Not a blind girl learning to survive. A fighter learning to thrive." Aurora turned to her father. Is that okay, Papa? Can I really do this? Marco looked at his daughter, this incredible, terrifying, beautiful person he'd somehow been lucky enough to create. Aurora, he said quietly, I've spent 12 years telling you what you couldn't do, what you couldn't be, what you needed to be protected from. He knelt in front of her, meeting her clouded eyes that saw more than his ever could. I'm done with that. From now on, you tell me who you are. You tell me what you're capable of, and I'll believe you. Even if I'm capable of more than you're comfortable with. Especially then. Aurora smiled, that brilliant, unguarded smile that reminded Marco why he'd built an empire in the first place. Not for power. For her. Then I'm going to be strong, Aurora said. Really strong. Strong enough that no one ever uses me to hurt you again. Strong enough that when people hear the name Aurora Bellini, they don't think blind girl, they think fighter. They already do, Isolde said softly. And it was true. In the days that followed, the story spread through every level of society. News channels ran footage of Aurora standing in that arena. Underground networks whispered about the blind girl who'd fought attackers twice her size. Criminal families learned that the Bellini heir wasn't a weakness. She was a weapon they hadn't anticipated. But more than that, people saw something they hadn't expected. A girl who refused to be defined by what she couldn't do. A teacher who'd transformed grief into purpose. A father who'd learned that letting go was the truest form of protection. 3 months later, Aurora gave her first public demonstration. 50 people in attendance, including representatives from families who'd once considered her a target. She moved through combat forms with a grace that left spectators silent. She disarmed 3 opponents simultaneously. She navigated an obstacle course designed to be impossible for someone without sight. And at the end, she stood in the center of the training floor and said 5 words that became legend. I don't need to see you. Because Aurora Bellini had learned the most important lesson of all. Strength isn't about what you're born with. It's about what you refuse to become. And Aurora Bellini refused to be helpless. Refused to be weak. Refused to be anything less than exactly who she chose to be. The end.